And I'm so excited to hear what they have to say, to learn about their journey, and for them to share all things special needs, homeschooling, and beyond. So, Miss Kathy Kuhl, I'd love for you to just introduce yourself, just say hi to everyone, and let us know who you are.
Hey, I'm Kathy Kuhl. I started homeschooling in 97 and I live in Northern Virginia.
And Miss Rochelle Matthews-Somerville, tell us about yourself.
Name is, like you said, Rochelle Matthews-Somerville, and I am the wife and mother of six. And I have been homeschooling for almost 17 years. So I have some longevity in this. So I absolutely enjoy just pouring into other people and hearing stories and sharing stories. So I'm excited to even share my story today.
Perfect. Well, go ahead, share your story. Tell us how you got into homeschooling. Why did you say yes to this? How did it start and how is it going?
Absolutely. So I am a teacher by trade. And so I always had that natural passion to learn. And although I wasn't homeschooled, I feel like I was as I take my kids through this experience. My oldest child has graduated and he's going to be, well, he's right now a junior in college. And then I have a graduating senior, and then two ninth graders, a seventh grader, and a fourth grader. And so ever since we started, my husband and I started homeschooling, it was really for the love of learning as opposed to running from something. You know, you hear lots of stories about not getting what you need, but my growing up was so rich. I was excited, and when it became time for my oldest son to start school, I was like, oh, what can we get into, And so there had been so many rich experiences. We were out at the museums. Everything was a learning kind of process, and after that, I loved it. And of course, because I'm a teacher by trade, it was just right there in my niche, and so ever since then, we've been homeschooling for 17 years, and I could not tell you that each one of those paths were anything similar. And I even have twins in there. So that's the interesting part of that.
I heard that I was going to ask, I was like, wait, two in ninth grade, are these Irish twins or real twins? Okay.
Real twins.
All right. Kathy, tell us about your journey.
Sure. I also trained as a teacher, which I don't think is at all necessary to homeschool a child with special needs. And I know Rochelle agrees. So I'll say that up front. I taught junior high math. Um, and when started having children, I thought I was done with being a teacher and sent my kids off to school. And my first child flourished. It was in an award-winning school. The vice president of the country came and said, "We want schools to be like this one." But my son went through it. And even though he loved being with the kids, he was falling through the cracks. He would come home furious, just frustrated because he'd been trying so hard to pay attention and figure out how to read that he'd explode if we asked him to put away his backpack or something.
Mhm.
And if you've had that situation of trying to remediate with an exhausted child after school, it doesn't work. So we started homeschooling just over the summers because I thought the school can't teach them. How can I? And I
Mhm.
thought I've trained in junior high, high school math and English. I did double certification, but that didn't involve helping a dyslexic learn how to read or helping an ADHD child sit still or learn to count. So after a couple summers and a lot of encouragement from homeschooling friends and folks at HSLDA, I decided to give it a shot for fourth grade. And wasn't perfect. We had hard days, but it was better than anything else. And my son was making progress. Sixth grade, the neuropsychologist assesses him and tells him that by homeschooling, I'm doing the best thing I could for him and that I should
Mhm.
write a book about it. Well, the world didn't need one more book about one family story and what worked for them. So I interviewed 64 families who were homeschooling kids with diagnosed learning disabilities. After he graduated, we did fourth through 12th grade. After that, then I had time to write. And interviewing them, I pulled their stories together and looked for patterns and tried to write the handbook that I wish I'd had back long ago when we started. Now, my kids are grown. My local grandchild is in public school, but I love working with her after school and other times. And my daughter, I'm happy to say, is homeschooling her kids in Southern California. So get out there and help out whenever I can.
Wow. I love it. And thank you for giving back in such a powerful way. You could have been a little bitter and said, well, I didn't have this when I needed it, but instead you paid it forward and you said, you know what, there are other people who need this. So I'm going to be the resource, even though I couldn't find the resource for myself. So thank you for that.
Thank you. When I first spoke at CHAP quite a few years ago, I think it was 2007, a couple of board members came up to me and I was thanking them and they were saying, no, we thank you for coming because they said, one of the biggest questions they were getting, and this was back way even 2007, was help, I want to homeschool a child with special needs.
Yeah. So let's stay on that for a little bit because I've heard the term special needs, I've heard learning disability, I've heard neuro um, diversity or neurodivergent learners. Is there a politically correct term or is there a term that sits better with you? Like what should be said or does it not matter?
Mm.
Everything is just
Mm.
accepted. Go ahead, Rochelle.
Yeah, I could definitely start. What I have learned over the years is that it is really family specific. Like there are things that are not okay, but then in that realm of what do we call the family or the child? A lot of families do have preferences, and it's based off of some type of experience.
Mhm.
And so what works for one family doesn't work for the other, just like everything else
Right.
in their life. So I am always hesitant to say that this is what we label it. Because the reality is that we should always deal with the child and not a label.
Mhm.
Yeah. So far in this conversation, I've been referring to special needs, but that's actually not what I usually say. I have found over the years that if I give a workshop on helping a child with a learning disability, maybe half of the people who would benefit from that talk will come. So, for instance, one of the workshops I'm giving on Thursday is called When Math Doesn't Come Easily,
Mhm.
because what I'm presenting is going to help whether or not a child has a diagnosis. So my book is first book is Homeschooling Your Struggling Learner, which is another nice broad thing because you got some parents who are really allergic to labels. They've
Yeah.
seen it misused. They think learning disabled means dumb. It doesn't, but that has that connotation in some places. And so I tend to prefer the broader labels, learning differently, learning differences. My company's called Learn Differently for that reason. But I basically listen to parents and kind of use the words they're using.
Okay, that makes sense. And Rochelle, you gave a really good response in terms of each family is different, and that's what I'm learning as it relates to, home-centered education. Some people call it homeschooling, some people call it doing life with your family, some people call it, homeschooling. But whenever I ask questions, people give such a broad answer, and I'm like, it just depends, huh? It's just what works best. Like I'll say, okay, so what curriculum should I use? Or, what would work best for this? And then once I got in, I realized that's why they couldn't answer. Because my 9-year-old and my 7-year-old, I would think, okay, this worked for one. Let's get the bang for the buck and do it for the other one. And it was just different. I had one child who needed spiral learning. He needed to learn a concept, master the concept, be reintroduced to that concept, and then start over again. I had a 5-year-old who was the complete opposite. And the way I found out was I was using a curriculum that was extremely repetitive. So let's say he was doing 1+1, 2+1. They would have 10 questions. 4 would be 1+1, 4 would be 2+2, and then you'd have like two others or something individual. And I saw him skip, and I'm like, why is he going to the first question, then going to number 5, then going to number 8? He figured it out, and he would answer all the 1+1s and then all the 2+2s. And I'm like, I see what you're doing. It's brilliant, except if you get one wrong, then now you get all of those wrong, right? But my point in saying all that is there is no one size fits all, not even with the family, because you can have, like you said, you have twins born on the same day, shared. They were roommates before they were roommates, and they're even different. So thank you for illuminating that.
I actually love your story because I mean you bring up the twins and so the twins were all my kids were little, they're clustered together, and so it was a little overwhelming at moments, but I would definitely do it again. But for the twins, when the twins are 3 and 4, number 3 and 4 child, and so when I had 1 and 2, and I was like, okay, this is like having just one child. I can do everything the same. When they start school, I just buy one of everything, and they are polar opposites. So one actually has ADHD, lots of executive functioning issues, got to do a lot with organizing him. And the other, if he hears something twice, he checks out on me. And it's so like, oh, okay, let me think about this. So it was literally like coming up with two different programs. And I had to realize, okay, just because they were, the same age and they look alike doesn't make them, not unique. And so I think your story is a testimony just to the uniqueness of kids in general, whether
Yes.
they have a label or not.
Mhm.
I love that.
Yeah, I've more than once I've had to kind of break the news to moms that, well, I'm sorry that that math curriculum that the first two kids love, just buy a different one. You know, let me help you here.
Yeah.
You don't make
So,
them all wear the same shoes. You shouldn't make them all do the same curriculum.
That's right.
well, sometimes I make them wear the same clothes because they don't get twins,
Sure, yeah. Sometimes hand-me-downs work.
but I get your point.
I'm thinking of the worn out sneakers that really just
Yeah.
Ah, yes, the hand-me-downs. Got you. Yes, so good. So let's talk a little bit about intuition. I feel like a lot of times when we suspect something, we know that we're probably right. But I've heard two different sides. I've heard one person tell me that they suspected that their child had a learning difference and they purposely did not go and get that diagnosed because to them it didn't matter. Meaning, whether or not you have this learning difference, I'm going to cater to your unique needs. And whether or not you do, I don't need an IEP because I'm already individually educating you, right? So that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is the minute you suspect something, go check it out, confirm, whether or not you're right, and then you can cater to that child. What is your thought on, like, how would you encourage or advise a person, mom, dad, who feels like there is something that's um like they have this intuition and they feel like,
yeah.
Sure.
I,
You
I
want to
know I'm
start,
supposed to
Kathy?
finish that sentence, but
We got you. We got you.
I got you. Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, I'll go first. I think I disagree with both of them because if you say, oh, the learning difference, learning disability doesn't matter, I'm just going to run with it. Yeah, maybe initially, if things are succeeding, if the child isn't discouraged, if the student's making progress and you can adapt, then things are good. Now, when you get to high school, college, and you're thinking, if this child is heading towards college and you want them to get, say, extra time on a standardized test for college admissions, or you think they're going to need accommodations in college, it does help to have that paper trail and not just, oh, we've suddenly invented a disability so we can get extra time and get into Harvard or whatever, whatever your goal is with better SAT scores. So there is some benefit to that. And on the other hand, to the person who wants to get the label immediately, no, I would say first do some reading, like if you suspected ADHD or dyslexia, join one of the national organizations, start reading, watch some webinars, and inform your intuition, make some notes. I like to put them on like one page of paper and go to the pediatrician if you've got a decent doctor who listens to you and say, this is what I'm seeing. And then make sure it isn't allergies making him fall asleep. So there's, just rule out the medical things. And there's a slew of medical things that can contribute to learning problems. And then take it from there, but not be too quick to label and not to say never labeling my kid. But I'd love to hear what you say, Rochelle.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and first co-sign all that. I do, but I sit on the fence where I have both. I have both. So I have a diagnosis, and then I have 3 others that are not diagnosed. But as a mother, I know because I've seen the patterns. But so I have different reasons for diagnosing and not. Well, first of all, regardless of what the label is, if you get a label, you still have to figure out who your child is and what's going to work. And so I'm not at that point yet where we need any of those accommodations for testing and things. But when we do a little bit further in high school, we will need that official diagnosis. But a lot of things, I love what you said too, Ro, about the fact that we're in an individualized education program. So there's no need to do a lot. My last 2, they have received speech for years until they didn't receive it anymore. But the speech and language pathologist is my sister. So it's not that they haven't received the services or anything like that. It's just that we have figured it out within our own village, is what I like to call people. I tell people all the time, when you homeschool, find your village, because that's important. You find support for your kids. You also need to find your village, that mecca of resources, so that you are not paralyzed by labels, right? Because labels are just that. It's like a piece of clothes. Your child has something. Your child is not that label. And so I love what Kathy said about not running to get a label, because then that defines the child. Then it's like, well, what curriculum works for kids with autism? Well, who is your child is my first question. Let's deal with who the child is, and let's match who that child is with what's going to work for that child. And so, I sit on both fences, and I've seen both sides, and I think there's a valid reason for diagnosing sometimes, and other times, you do what you need to, because you're going to have to do that after the diagnosis anyway.
Yeah, and to piggyback on something Rochelle said, with all of which I agreed with, but it's if you go to get a child diagnosed, it's important that your child understand. We're not saying there's something wrong with you. We're not saying this defines you. You're still the kid that loves soccer or makes the cool origami or whatever your passions are. And we're not going to define you by this label. The way I explained it to my son is, we could see you're hard. We're working hard. We can see you're really trying, and what the ways I'm teaching you aren't working. So we want to understand how you learn so that I can do a better job teaching you. So it's on me. It's what I'm doing wrong and what I need to customize.
So much wisdom in what the both of you said, because when you talked about the labels and it crippling and paralyzing you, I've literally met people who'll be like, oh, hi, this is my son, he's autistic. And I'm like, well, does this son have a name? Right? Like or even worse, apologies. And I understand in the grand scheme of things, what they're trying to say is, please excuse this behavior. Maybe they did something that you would deem inappropriate, but there's a valid reason. But I feel like there's a different way to communicate that than just apologizing for your child, because regardless of what that diagnosis is, they can hear and they still have feelings. And you don't want to walk around constantly apologizing for someone. Eventually, they just want to feel like they want to shrink or disappear, right? So if you have any kind of powerful language or any tips on how to help parents who are trying to navigate I love my child, but I understand that this is how, the world navigates around them. Like, how would you help them with that balance?
Do you mean like helping a co-op teacher understand, or?
No, not even. So like for a parent, instead of the parent saying, apologizing for something, what's like a more powerful language for them to communicate what they want to say? Or instead of them, constantly feeling that they have to explain, like how would you encourage someone who has a child with a learning disability and they often feel like they need to rearrange the world around that child?
Ooh. Good question.
That's a really good question. It is a really good question. I mean, it's not a simple answer to that, because everyone is on their own journey. And part of that journey is the
That's your
acceptance
theme
of
song, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's gonna be your answer for everything.
It is, because everybody is in a different space. Some newly diagnosed families are dealing with it at a very different level than if you've had a diagnosis, you've accepted it. This is my child, because, quite frankly, the child who falls out in the middle of the store, guess what? I can tell you a story about my typical child that did that, right? And so it's all on the continuum of learning. And so I tend to encourage parents by, first of all, relating to their story. I mean, probably most of the things that their kids have done, my child has done, but where do we go from here? How do we work through it? Because a lot of times is that they don't have answers, or they're not sure what to do. And so therefore it's like, this is great. He's falling out on the floor. Why? What's the why behind it? Like, if it's to communicate that he wants that from the store and you didn't get it, then we need to replace that behavior with something that is that's more socially acceptable, or that's more appropriate for you as a parent. And so a lot of times the immature behaviors are simply an indication that there's more to be taught. And who doesn't need to learn more, So I think also giving parents that experience where I think a lot of that comes from being rejected, or being ostracized by society, when your kids having a tantrum at camp, they're kicked out of camp. Well, when you provide opposite experiences and you can relate to these families, I think it makes them feel equipped and encouraged. And so it's not that you always want to give families permission to feel, right? So I don't ever want to tell a family, you shouldn't feel like that, because we don't want to do that, because they have permission to feel. This is their life, right? But you also want to equip them at the same time. And so that's kind of the space that I sit in when I try to, work with families and have them in my spaces. I try to relate to them and and let them know that, this is just an indication that we need to learn, or we need to teach them this, just like every other child. They do it differently, they show it differently, but because we've taught them different behaviors. And so that's kind of how I navigate that. What about you, Kathy?
Well, I think another angle on this is when a parent gets a diagnosis, that hurts. And I've just said it the wrong way. When a child gets a diagnosis, the parent hurts. The parent receives this packet and there's all this language that's hard to understand, and it just feels like a life sentence, and you grieve. And when I talk with parents about planning, I say you need to start by understanding where you are, where your child is academically, emotionally, socially, life skills, all of those areas, but also where are you? And each time we've gotten a new diagnosis or an evaluation for my son, who's grown now, but as he was growing and we get the new ones, you grieve over different things. And sometimes you feel jealous of those other people whose kids are just blazing right along. And there's a bunch of emotions going on, and you need to recognize that and give yourself permission to that. And because I'm a Christian, I think there's a good God behind all this. And so that doesn't mean I don't grieve about it, but at some point I think, okay, do I think God has allowed this? And do I think he's going to work good from it? And if I keep wallowing in my grief or aiming for perfectionism again and again, I'm not doing my son any favors, and I'm not doing my family any favors. So I need to progress from that.
So I did not expect the conversation to go in this direction that's happening in my head right now, but I feel like you're pulling my tongue. So Rochelle used the word acceptance, and you used the word Christian. And what's coming for me is, it's a little controversial, but I think sometimes Christians misunderstand some scriptures and then they tweak it. So there's a scripture that says, call those things that be not as though it were. I've seen people do the opposite. I've seen someone say, oh, no, my child is not autistic. And the child has a diagnosis. The child is exhibiting all the symptoms, but they're in denial. And I can understand, like you said it, there's a certain level of grieving that happens, but I don't know that denial is the answer, because this is not stage one. Like, there are the stages of grief that we know about where, in the beginning, you're like, this can't be, no, it's not true. But this was like years in, where I actually went to someone. I said, hey, I have a friend with an autistic child. Can I connect you so that you can, be a support? And she said, my child doesn't have autism. So I understand what she was trying to do is call things that be not as though they were, but that's a little bit of the flip. So, like, what has been your experience with Christianity and learning differences?
That's a good
I'm not
question.
sure it was Christianity, but I had seen one family that just flat out denied my hint that their child might benefit from some testing. This was a 9th grader whose handwriting was so bad that in algebra, I could not tell X's from Y's.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I suggested some help might be necessary, and the parents were, no, thank you. And so that was as far as I could take it. I might try the medical analogy. Like, if you thought your child had strep, you would want to get that tested, and maybe it would. One of the problems we have as home educating parents is teachers is what the scientists would call a small sample size. I've taught 5, Rochelle's taught 6 kids. I had 2 at home. And even when I was teaching in public school, I had 150 8th graders I was teaching math to each year. That's still, you need to be teaching a while with 150 before you really have a sense of what's in the range of normal and what's beyond. So I would encourage parents to, well, if I go back to your Christian, I guess I do have an answer. I think God's given us doctors and experts as a blessing to help us. And sure, there may be some that aren't good. I'm not saying go to the first person you see, but that's a resource that's out there. And so I can love my child that way by getting them help.
That's always it's an interesting space that I make sure that I don't judge, because again, I'm going to say it again, everybody's on their own journey, and they're at they're at a different place. There is a big space between denial and acceptance. And sometimes if you talk intimately with these parents, they have a reason for feeling the way they do. It may not be logical to you in terms of, well, clearly I can see A, B, and C. Sometimes, especially if this is the oldest child and they have nothing to compare it to, or, all of our kids are completely different. And so it's like, I know there's something going on, but I'm looking at all of these symptoms of autism and they're not all of them are there. So it could be something else. So it may not be that the parent is in total denial.
Good point.
But, I dealt with this with a very, very close family member, and his son literally just transitioned into kindergarten. And right before kindergarten, he finally got the diagnosis. But this was said to him at 2, right? So we did this for 3 years, and the testing came back, and it was always something that didn't make sense. But he did a lot of scripting, and the intonation of the scripting was exactly like the shows he was watching. And then of course we hit the pandemic. And as parents worked a lot in the house, the child was on the iPad a lot. Well, the kid was smart as a whip. I mean, he learned Spanish. Like you could say phrases to him in Spanish. And this was before school age, right? He knew all his numbers, he knew math. I mean, he was reading before he went to school. But they were still, you could still tell that there's autism underlining. And so from the parent's perspective, this is not what you see when you say autism, because it also has a negative connotation. So instead of talking about a disability, I like to talk about, well, where do you see your son? What are the goals for your daughter or your son? Let's talk about, are you where you want to be? Like each year, do you see progress? Talk about the here and now. And sometimes they will eventually see it. Well, he's not progressing. I see that he only moved from here to here, or she only moved from here to here. Talking about it in real practical terms with a lot of families that that are not ready to accept or don't see certain things, sometimes makes a difference. Also, I think sometimes we have to remember that we come with a lot more background than a lot of these families. So how would they know, right? They may not even know the diagnosis you're talking about, but all they know, they saw it in a movie and this kid did nothing in the corner. And a lot of times when you say autism, there's an image that comes in your head. And so of course that doesn't necessarily always work. But I think that there's a lot of reasons why parents or guardians can defend why they don't believe their child has a disability, but rather speak about it in terms of difficulty. And so I love what Kathy said. If you talk about a difficulty, you may get a little bit further.
Or even a difference.
Yes.
Another angle to go with this, because and I think another way to appeal to parents is leveling the playing field. If this is a child who would benefit from this help, like take assistive technologies, they're coming up with new stuff every week and we can hardly keep up. Even the stuff that's built into our computers and phones and tablets is updated regularly. And there's all these cool little widgets, unless you have someone with expertise in that, it's hard to know all the things that your device might do that would accommodate this child.
Yeah, those are really good points. And I hear what you're saying, Rochelle, in terms of the acceptance. I think a lot of times it's culture, sometimes it's shame. And going back to the Christian piece, I think sometimes the idea is that if you accept that, then now you're canceling out God's power to do something else, right? Versus accepting, this is the life that I have, and I'm going to love this person regardless of any label. But it's like, oh, if I accept this, then now God can't turn it around. I'm canceling out the healing. And I'm like, I don't know, that's how it works, right?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And there's nothing that would suggest that God made us all the same. I mean, that's the beautiful thing.
Right?
Absolutely. That's the beautiful thing about, this creation of a human that he made, is that we are all different. And I think we all have a place and a space. And I think that when we function like that, it'll be a little bit easier for everybody.
I love that. I want to take you out of a box. I don't want to ask you a specific question because I feel like there's so much to glean from you, so much wisdom, and I don't want to keep asking you specific questions where you can only respond to this. So as general as it gets, what are you? I may have frozen. What are two to three things that you think that you wish everyone knew?
I'm gonna go first, Kathy.
Yeah,
I'll throw out one.
you want me to, or you want to? Go ahead.
You can, okay, you can go ahead.
Um, enjoy your child. First thing I ask parents is, what's your child good at? What do they enjoy doing? And even if it's they're obsessively collecting bottle caps, or they're really good at telling you in tremendous detail about that movie they just, whatever it is. Right. One of the women I was helping here in Virginia's son was really into vacuum cleaners, and whatever they're interested in, you want to encourage that. I mean, not that they're going to necessarily make a career with vacuum cleaners or bottle caps, but that passion, or soccer, they might, but they might not. Those passions are teaching them skills of discipline, of organization, and they're so good for how they feel about themselves. Because if they're struggling in school, or in your homeschool, I mean, at whatever age, at some point they may start thinking they're stupid. With my son, it was probably first grade. And he's not. But you see people who you don't seem as bright as you, but they can do that task on time and they can get things finished. Little sister passed me in math and now I feel stupid. Those are common things. So you've got to nurture your children. Well, Dr. Richard Brooks, whose book is over there, that's why I'm staring that way. He refers to islands of competence. Imagine you're swimming sunk in the Pacific and there's an island there. You're going to cling to that island. So we want to help nurture that in our kids. I think that's my first one. I'll think of some more while Rochelle's talking. How's that?
Okay, I'll give you a nugget. I would like, if I could have one thing at the top, I mentioned it before, but I think to encourage everybody, I say one of the first things you should do is not run out and look for a curriculum, but it is to build your village. And I'm going to say we spend a lot of time figuring out what our kids need. And that's great. And we do a great job as homeschool parents. But there's another side to this, because when you are lost with answers, you also need your support system in place. And so I tell people, I say, that's one of the first things you should do. Like, where did you hear about homeschooling? If this is an interest to you, where did you see it? And if your niche is going to be with the disability field, then you need to find somebody in that area that can support you. And so I always say, find your village. Who's your village? Who is your village? So that's my first nugget.
Okay. Now we just keep volleying this one. Parents need to take care of themselves. When your child is hurting, when your teenager's struggling, you just want to fix it. And we're all like that. We want to smooth the path for our kids, and sometimes they just don't have a smooth path. And we worry over that. We grieve over a new diagnosis, or we're frustrated because we bought our 5th curriculum and it isn't working either. So there's a lot of frustration and pain at times. And if parents aren't doing things to take care of themselves, then we're going to snap at our kids. Marriages can struggle and unravel. So we got to take care of ourselves. And by that, I would, we said, if you went to the hardware store, it counted as a date, as long as you didn't talk about kids half the time and as long as you got ice cream afterwards. So that we'd have those kind of dates, but you've got to nurture that relationship to help and take care of yourself. Going to bed, not staying up till 3 looking for the perfect solution on the internet is a great example, because you're going to be a crabby parent the next morning if you stay up till 3 regularly. So, or for me, even to midnight.
You ladies are so gracious. You give me like 5 tips in one, and then you say, well, that's one. I'll think of another one. And I'm like, whoa, I just heard 10. Thank you.
Yeah. So Kathy took my second one. So now I got to think of something else, because that's really important. That's really important. I'm going to say, when you have a child with special needs who does not learn in that typical developmental pattern, you have to get ready to celebrate the small things. This was huge for me, because a lot of families, they'll pick up that curriculum and they'll say, well, I feel like a failure. Well, you feel like a failure because the curriculum wasn't right, your expectations weren't right, and the child probably grew expeditiously, but you didn't have a way to measure those small little things. I know with my son with ADHD, he's in 9th grade, and I can't tell you how I mean, inside I feel like crying when he gets through one thing without getting up. Like, even if it's 15, 20 minutes, like, it's significant. When he starts a task without me having to intervene, it's significant. And people look at me like, he's in ninth grade, shouldn't he? No, no, these are our milestones because we weren't there. We were definitely not there. And so it's the small things. And also a lot of times when you have kids with special needs, it's not only about academics. Like, it's the behavioral things, initiating the task and staying on task and staying in the seat or asking permission to leave and then actually coming back. Those are two different things, right? And so, remember, when we homeschool, we are growing the whole child, right? It's not about academics. We are not necessarily going to have a whole, race of rock stars or, astronauts, but they're all going to be different, and they're all going to they walk in their own space and use their own timeline, and it's all amazing. But you have to have a way of capturing it, or you're going to feel like you haven't grown and your child hasn't grown, and that's simply not the truth.
Rochelle, let's stay there for a little bit because I hear you dropping all these executive function
Sure.
terminology. Can we talk a little bit about the importance of executive function? And I'll give you a little background. So I never thought about executive function for children, and I'm like, regardless of your learning difference, why isn't it taught to every single child? I'm a productivity coach and I'm helping women right now to say, okay, well, this is the organization piece. Let's talk about metacognition. And it sounds like it's not until something is quote unquote wrong that we start to teach these valuable skills, which is another reason I love homeschooling because you're teaching them real life. But I'll get off my soapbox. Please share about the importance of executive function in just the general homeschool environment or just for a general child.
Absolutely. So first of all, there is this kind of cloudy umbrella that only kids with disabilities suffer from, executive functioning difficulties. Well, first of all, everybody needs to know that we all function with our executive functioning. I mean, these are the things that help us get to places on time. It's time management, it's organization, it is starting a task. I mean, it's a lot. It is a lot. It's a lot for me, But the thing is that what we do is we have tools, like, we have our cell phones that go off. There's always something beeping around this house, and people are like, what's that? I'm like, nope, it's not the washing machine. It's just Alexa. Alexa goes off all the time. To keep time management. So these are just really good tools. Tools that you use in regular life, right? I don't think we as adults realize how many, visuals and how many tools that we use just to navigate a day. It's like, well, you use tools too. I said this to a parent, and parent's like, no, I don't. I'm like, do you have a cell phone? Yes. I said, do you have a calendar? Do you color code anything? All of these. And these are just simple. I mean, you can work on simple strategies, as you probably know, all the way to elaborate ones. But it starts small. Everybody needs support. I say, when you hit middle school, it doesn't matter what's going on. All of those kids could benefit from some type of structure that provides them strengthening of their executive functioning skills. It's a lot. You go from everybody doing things for you, and then we throw you in where you have to find the classroom, you have to find your locker, you have to change books. It's a lot all at once, and so just working and having children be aware of what those skills are, it also helps them to realize, I'm really good at this, but I need a little bit of support at this. That's powerful too. It's not all or nothing. It's not like, Kathy, you don't have executive functioning skills, and Ro, you have them all. No, it's not that. It's like, it's again a continuum of, where are your strengths and where are the areas of needs that you need support. And so I love working with kids, and actually, I mean, even when I'm not specifically working on executive functioning, it's always in the back of my head, how can we help this child? And at the end of the day, the answer is typically something with executive functioning.
I think it's helpful to discuss this because for a lot of us growing up in school, we just kind of learned all this stuff by osmosis. Maybe the teacher says, write down the assignments. And maybe if you had a teacher in middle school, they'd say, and have your parents initial it, so that I can see that it got home, but then by high school, it's pretty much figured out, kids, get a little notebook and write it down, or maybe, but when we've got kids with learning differences, we have to teach it not only explicitly, but repeatedly. I tell parents, plan on teaching planning over and over. And over the years, we'd buy different calendars. I'll let my son pick one, find what worked for him. I think a daytimer ended up being his favorite. I also scaffolded it, to use the education term, of it was too much for this dyslexic dysgraphic guy to write down all his high school assignments. So once a week, we were in a co-op and he was taking a couple classes with different people. So I'd say, okay, bring all the pages here. Here's a list you have for me of what's due for me this week. Now, and here's when your classes are. Here's a calendar. When are you thinking you'll do what? And the first few times we did that, all he had to do was tell me, and I was his scribe, so that he got a list out of it, but he did all the mental work of organizing it. We also had a schedule posted on a whiteboard, even from 4th grade on, because unaware of time, it was, how much longer is mom going to afflict language arts on me? He's the poor child of the son of an English major. It could have been hours, but he was able to say, Mom, it's supposed to be soccer break now, and point to the. So it was good for me, kept me from going on too long. It helped us balance our day. So, but that's a lot more than I would have done for some other kids who didn't need it.
Well, who we pretend don't need it, right?
True.
I feel like we do need it.
Mhm.
Yeah, like even for me, like it's the work and memory piece. I'm like, okay, I know that I have a 1-year-old and that man for 1 year probably wasn't getting any sleep. And for me, my coping mechanism was writing it down. So I feel like we all need it, but we just kind of like we actually do a disservice.
Yeah.
So right, because if these are skills that help you to cope, to manage your day, to plan, to start and actually complete tasks, then like I said before, everyone needs to learn this. This is a life skill, right?
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that a lot of times parents get frustrated because they're like, I've tried this and I've tried this, and and then it didn't work, and so they took it back. And it's like, well, wait, remember, this is not your system. This is your child's system. So your job is to keep going until they find something that works for them.
Mhm.
I can't tell you all the supports that I've pulled out just for my 9th grader. And he finally was like, as he got older, the beauty is that he was able to articulate why one system didn't work. And so then I could better match what he needed. But at
Mhm.
first I was like a magician. I was literally like a magician, and I couldn't understand why this worked for 2 weeks, and then you're
Yeah.
telling me it doesn't work. You don't like this calendar anymore, but you drew all in it, and finally he was like, it's too much on one page. I literally can't see it. Like everything is equally important, and I just can't see what I need to. Okay, that was a gift to me,
Yeah.
because it wasn't his failure. It was, I just haven't found it yet. And so, I mean, I love that, but do understand, as a parent, it's going to always change. The supports that kids and young adults need, it changes. And so that first calendar that worked, that you pulled out when your kid was in 5th grade, is not going to work all the way through high school,
Yeah.
right? And then the goal is to slowly give them the responsibility of organizing, and so they have to find something that works for them.
Mhm.
It's tempting to want to give our kids what worked for us and be
Yeah.
frustrated when it doesn't work that way. But it's also good to just be very broad-minded about how your child wants to organize their stuff. Some families I know have their kids, couldn't get their kids to hang up clothes in hangers or put clothes away in drawers, but clear plastic bins were with a picture of a shirt on the front, and this is where all the shirts go work. Or
Right.
another family, a pair of parents who were IT professionals in Idaho contacted me, and for their homeschool, they had adopted 2 practices from their business. They started homeschooling during COVID, and they used Trello to manage their high school students' schedule. And he was posting his status on there, and they had weekly stand-ups, just like he was an employee. And he'd have to say what his progress was on each thing. So he's going to go to his first job already knowing how to do all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, that sounds
That's
like
great.
my MO. All right, ladies, I want to shift this to character development because I'm listening to him like, have you always been so amazing, so graceful? So, you know what, Lord, just download whatever I need and I will do whatever I need for this kid. Like, tell me how this has shaped you. Because I'm seeing the fruit and I'm like, you're so amazing. Let me just give you a chance to answer. I am personally impressed by the 2 of you.
I appreciate it, but please remember, this is 17 years in, because during that first year, I was in tears with my son, maybe the first, second, third year. And then the second one came and I was like, wait a minute, you're not anything like this one. You mean I can't? that shock of not being able to just replicate what I did. And then you get twins and it's like, oh, no, I can't do this. You ready to give up? We went through the whole gamut. So this has literally been through trial and error that I've gotten to this space. But I think through all of my experiences, what I learned is that God has literally gifted all of my kids differently, and that I need to just figure out and give them the space to figure out what their gifts are. So that's my goal. Like every year, it's like a planning, but it's not like mom's planning. We're going to do this. We sit down and it's like, okay, what are you interested in? What does that look like to make this a successful and enjoyable high school year for you? Because that's a big piece of it. Like,
Enjoyable.
yeah, well, now granted, now don't get me wrong, they're not running to the table saying math, they're not doing that yet. But we do lots of games. We do lots of different things, and it is sometimes I have to say, well, is it painful? Okay, if it's not painful, we're doing good, right? But it has been changing and trial and error, and I'm okay with it. That's the other piece, is that sometimes parents feel like if I got halfway through and this curriculum is not working, I cannot change this math because I've lost time. And what I say to them is, anytime you learn more about your child, it is not lost time. It's not lost time at all. So no, you have gained a lot because now you know what's not going to work. Now let's keep going. What else are you going to learn this year? And so I think sometimes it's perspective and mindset.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't start here.
Me neither. And I'm not still in the trenches like Rochelle is. And so it's a different situation for me. My books would be a lot longer if they'd been about my mistakes. I'm passing on what worked, but I made a lot of mistakes. And one of them, I think, was just being too anxious and thinking too much that it relied on me and I had to get it right. And I was praying a lot, but anxious and not trusting as much as I would encourage my younger self to be, because it doesn't depend on you. You can't make a child learn. If your child is bound and determined not to work, then you can't make someone work. You can encourage them and help them, but there's limitations, and there's no limitations with God. So I should have leaned on him more. That's what I'd say. And that's all grace. You just have to say, okay, God. One time when I was working on my first book, I was sitting at this desk and my son came in. He's about 6'1". He graduated by then, and he's looking at me and said, "What's wrong, Mom?" And I just picked up a book and I said, "I've had this book. I've known about it for years, but I'm only reading it now. And I wish I had read this 8 years ago." And he comes up and he pats me on the shoulder and he says, "It's okay, Mom. God knew you weren't going to know until now." And it just chokes me up, because I thought if I had to choose between the kid who could read on grade level and make it through college in 4 years and the kid who recognizes God's sovereignty, I got what I want.
Absolutely.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I love that.
I'm not condemned, but I'm convicted. I'm so convicted by what you're sharing. I remember once my husband and I were together and we saw a little girl and she said something to the effect of she's shy. And after that, he said to me, "Well, that's pride." And I'm like, "How's that pride?" What he was trying to say is she thought so much of herself that she was so concerned about what everyone was thinking. And that's why she was shy. And as you're talking, what I'm thinking about is all these nights that I spend looking at different things, all this time that I spend trying to control the situation and not doing too well at managing expectations. It was pride. No, it is. Like I'm deep in it. My kids are 7 and 9 and I have a 1-year-old. But it's pride, it's control. And I think my own personal development is learning to trust the process and learning to trust the creator. Like he loves my children more than I could ever love them or even fathom, right? And here I am like, well, what is this curriculum that I need to purchase? And how many questions do they need to answer to gain mastery? And it's like, what about the relationship? What about what God sees? What about the way they're wired? Why are they wired this way? Because God created them this way for a purpose. So for anyone who's listening, let the reins go. Give yourself a break. You're not that important in the grand scheme of things. This is God's big plan. This is his idea, homeschool and the institution of family, the institution of, this home-centered education that we're doing. It's God's big idea. So give yourself some slack, mamas. Any final thoughts, ladies?
Amen.
Wow. I was about to say, wait, you want me to come after that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, I always tell people that I tell people at the end of my presentations that homeschooling is not easy, just like parenting is not easy. Nobody sent them home with, instructions or anything like that.
Mm.
But I truly feel like homeschooling is a calling. And when God calls you, he also equips you. And so a lot of times we just have to sit still. We have to, because he knows where they're going to be despite what you do. And regardless of what label or what strengths or weaknesses your child comes with, he's going to provide you with what you need. But sometimes you just have to sit still and trust. So I do love what you said, Ro.
Yeah, I agree with all of that and encourage folks to look for other folks to lean on. Don't go it alone. You may be an online group of other people homeschooling kids on the spectrum, or whatever area it is. Maybe it's one woman in Pennsylvania told me it was easier to explain homeschooling to the autistic support group than to explain autism to the homeschool support group. So she found help connecting with that local group, even though she was the only homeschooler in that town's group.
Oh,
So be broad-minded about where you're looking for support, because sometimes it shows up in unexpected places.
I love it.
I like that.
One thing I would share with anyone who's listening is to look at the superpowers. I think sometimes the reason people run away from labels is because we focus on the weakness, or we focus on the opportunity for improvement versus the things that they're good at. Okay, maybe they can't sit still for X amount of minutes, but are they amazing at music? Can they teach themselves how to do something? Can they memorize something that's beyond their grade level? Like look at the things that are really, really good. And I just want to thank you ladies so much for your time, so much for your wisdom, and for just sharing with us today and just encouraging everyone in this space, regardless of where they sit, and reminding us that each family is unique, each child is unique. God has an amazing plan. And I just thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.